The night sky above Earth was silent and filled with countless stars, but far beyond those stars, there was a world where decisions were made that could change the lives of many, and from that far world, a young woman was chosen for a mission unlike any other her people had faced before, and this mission was not about war or destruction or conquest, but about something far more subtle and dangerous, because it was about the human heart and the hidden strength that humans carried within themselves. She was trained from childhood to obey without question and to follow orders as if they were the air she breathed, and when she was called into the great chamber of leaders, she was told her task was simple but also dangerous. She was told that humanity was a young race strong in spirit and fast in growth, and that her people needed something hidden deep within human life, something that could help save her world from slow death. Her task was to travel to Earth and find one human and to bring him close and to use her beauty and her knowledge and her charm to seduce him, and then to carry back what was needed and nothing more. At first she felt nothing because she was trained to be cold and empty like stone. Her people told her that feelings were weakness, that love was only a human mistake, that trust was only a fragile illusion, and so she believed them as she stepped inside the silver vessel that carried her across endless darkness, until at last she reached the skies of Earth where the blue ocean shone like liquid gems and the green land stretched wide and free. Her orders were clear. She had to find a human man, not powerful, not wealthy, not known, but ordinary, because ordinary humans carried the truest essence of what made their race different, and she was told that this man must be made to love her, and when his guard was down, she was to take what her people wanted and then leave, without looking back, without regret, without memory, without hesitation. When she first saw him, he was nothing like she expected. He was no warrior, no leader, no shining hero. He was simply a man who worked hard every day, with hands that carried scars from years of labor and eyes that carried a quiet fire she did not understand. He greeted her with a smile when she appeared in his small town and spoke to her with kindness that was not forced and not false, and it unsettled her, because she was taught that humans were selfish and cruel and weak. But this man was not weak, and this man did not treat her as a tool or a prize. He simply treated her as if she was human too. Each day she tried to follow the mission as ordered. She tried to play the part of the stranger who wanted closeness. She tried to hide behind soft words and gentle looks, but she found herself listening to his stories and watching the way he gave food to stray animals and helped the old without asking for reward. And she found herself feeling something strange in her chest, something heavy but not painful, something she had no name for because her people never taught her what it meant. The watchers from her world were not blind. They sent her secret messages hidden in the air, telling her to hurry, telling her to act, telling her to complete her task because time was short and their patience was burning away. But each time she looked into the eyes of the man she was supposed to betray, she felt her hands weaken and her voice tremble, and she found excuses to delay and excuses to wait. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and the sky burned gold and red, she stood beside him as he spoke about his dreams. Dreams of a better life, dreams of a world without hunger, dreams of children who could grow in safety. And for the first time in her life, she realized that she was not simply listening. She was feeling, she was changing, and she was afraid because she knew that if her people saw too deep into her heart, they would destroy her and they would destroy him too. The mission that once felt so clear now felt like a blade pressed against her own skin. She was supposed to seduce him to make him trust her so she could steal what he carried within. Yet, as she stood there in the glow of a dying sun, she began to wonder if perhaps it was not her who was the hunter, but her who was being captured by something she never understood before. Her people had told her that failure was not an option, that if she disobeyed, she would pay a price no one could survive, and that the fate of her entire world rested on her success. But deep within, she felt that something even greater was at stake, because it was no longer only about her people and their hunger for survival. It was now about him and the bond that was slowly forming like a seed in dark soil, and she could no longer tell if she wanted the mission to end in success or in something entirely different, something dangerous and yet beautiful. And so the night fell, and she returned to the small place she now called her shelter, and for the first time she lay awake, not in silence, but in storm, her mind torn between loyalty to her world and the strange warmth she felt when the human smiled at her. She closed her eyes, but rest would not come, and in the darkness she finally whispered words she was not supposed to speak. "I do not know what I am becoming," and while she did not yet know it, her hesitation was already being seen by those who watched her from the skies, and soon they would decide whether she had gone too far, and whether the mission would remain hers, or whether someone else would be sent to take her place with force, and with no mercy. The days passed slowly, yet each moment felt heavier than the one before, as the alien woman tried to hold on to the cold training her people had given her. And yet she found that the more time she spent beside the human, the less she could remember the old lessons, because the human spoke with honesty and moved with kindness, and every time he looked at her with trust, she felt something she could not name, but she could not escape it either. She was supposed to play a role, to act like a stranger who wanted closeness so that she could complete her mission, but she realized that her role was slipping away, and she was not only acting anymore, because when he laughed she felt warmth, and when he was silent she felt worry, and when he touched her hand even for a moment, she felt her entire being tremble, as if she was not an agent of another world, but a woman who had discovered something new and terrifying. The human did not know the truth of who she was or why she had come. Yet he welcomed her into his days and shared with her the little things of life. He showed her how he worked, how he cared for others, how he believed that no matter how much pain the world carried, there was always a chance to make it better, and each word he spoke became a seed planted deep within her where no order from her people could reach at night. When she was alone, she would hear the voices of her commanders whispering into her mind, urging her to finish the task, urging her to take what was needed, urging her to remember that her entire world depended on her. But when morning came, and she saw him once again, standing with that quiet fire in his eyes, she felt her resolve break into pieces, and she told herself, just one more day, just one more moment, just one more chance to understand what this feeling really was. One evening, they sat together under a sky filled with stars, and he told her about the mysteries of the universe that humans still could not understand. He spoke about how small they were, and yet how strong they could be when they stood together, and how even in weakness there was beauty, because weakness made them try harder, and because weakness made them care more for one another. She listened in silence, her heart burning with conflict, because she knew that her people had always mocked humanity for being weak, but now she wondered if perhaps weakness was not weakness at all, but a hidden strength her people had never known. The more she listened, the more she felt the pull of something dangerous, because she began to imagine a life where she was not a weapon, not a tool, not a spy, but simply a woman who could walk beside a man and share his dreams and build something that was not commanded by leaders or bound by fear, but built by choice and by trust. Yet every time she let that dream rise inside her, she would crush it down, because she knew her people were watching, and if they saw even a shadow of betrayal, they would destroy everything she had begun to feel. One night, she woke from restless sleep, her body shaking with fear, because in her mind she heard the voice of her commander clearer than ever before. The voice told her the time was ending, the mission had gone too slow, the patience of her world was breaking, and if she did not act soon, another would be sent to finish what she had failed to do, and that other would not use kindness or beauty, but force and death. She lay there in the darkness, trembling, because she knew they meant it, and she knew that if another was sent, the human would not survive the next morning. When she saw him again, she tried to keep her distance. She told herself that this must end, that she must do what she was ordered to do before it was too late. But when he asked her if she was all right, when he looked at her with worry instead of suspicion, she felt her strength crumble, and instead of pushing him away, she found herself stepping closer, and the words that came out of her mouth were not lies, but truths she had never meant to share. She told him that she was afraid, though she did not say of what, and he listened without judgment and told her that fear was not a curse, but a sign that you had something worth protecting. In that moment she realized that she was no longer trapped only by her mission, but by her own heart, and she could not tell where duty ended and where desire began, and she could not tell whether she was betraying her people or saving herself. The bond between them grew stronger each day, though unspoken and hidden beneath small actions and gentle looks, and the more it grew, the more danger it carried, because she knew the watchers above were recording every delay, every hesitation, every pause, and soon they would see that she was no longer the cold servant they had created, but something else entirely, something they would never forgive. Still, she could not stop herself from walking beside him, from listening to his voice, from letting herself believe that maybe there was a life beyond orders and beyond missions, a life where two different worlds could meet, not through war or theft, but through something that could not be controlled. And as she closed her eyes that night, she finally admitted to herself what she had been denying since the first day she met him. She no longer wanted to succeed in her mission. She no longer wanted to steal from him. She no longer wanted to be the weapon her people had made her. She only wanted to stay a little longer and see what would happen if she chose him instead of them. But far above the sky, her people were not blind, and they were not patient, and they whispered to one another that the woman they had trusted was no longer theirs, and that soon a decision would have to be made, and it would not be a gentle one. The days grew heavy, and the nights were filled with restless silence, because the alien woman began to notice strange changes within her body, and at first she tried to ignore them and tell herself that it was nothing more than the strain of the mission and the endless pressure from her people. But soon she could no longer deny the truth, because her strength was shifting, her energy was bending in ways she had never known before, and the feeling that rose inside her was one that no training and no order had ever prepared her for. She stood before the mirror in the small place she called her shelter and touched her stomach with trembling hands, and in that moment she felt the spark of life inside her, and she knew it was not ordinary. It was something forbidden and dangerous. It was the child of two worlds, the child of her people and of the human she was meant to betray, and her breath broke as she realized that what grew inside her could change everything she had ever known. Fear struck her like fire, because she remembered the warnings of her leaders, who had always declared that no bond with humans was allowed, no life could ever be shared, no blood could ever be mixed, and those who tried would be erased without mercy and without question. And she knew that if they found out she carried this secret, she would not only lose her life, but the humans she cared for would be hunted until nothing was left of him. She tried to hide it from herself, but the changes became clearer, and she felt weakness she had never felt before. But along with that weakness came a strange strength, because she realized that she could not think only of herself anymore. Now every choice, every step, every breath carried the weight of the life that was growing inside her, and that life whispered to her in silence that it deserved to exist, even if the entire universe stood against it. Human began to notice that something was wrong. He saw the way her hands shook. He saw the way her eyes were filled with shadows, and he asked her again and again if she was sick, if she was hurt, if she needed help, and she wanted to tell him everything, but the words refused to come out, because she feared that once spoken, the truth could not be taken back, and she was terrified of what he might think if he learned that she was not who he believed her to be. One night, when the sky outside was dark and filled with storms, she woke with pain tearing through her body, and she could not hide her cries, and the human rushed to her side and held her as she shook and begged for breath. And in that moment he saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the fear and the secret she had been hiding, and he told her softly that whatever it was, she did not have to face it alone. Her lips trembled, and finally the truth spilled out, not all at once, but piece by piece. She told him that she was not from this world, that she was sent with orders, that she was never meant to care for him, and never meant to stay. And she told him that now she carried within her something that her people would call a crime, but to her it felt like a miracle. And when she spoke these words, her heart felt like it would break, because she could not imagine him accepting her after such a betrayal. The silence between them was endless, but then he lifted her face and looked into her eyes, and told her that he did not care where she came from. He did not care what blood ran in her veins. He only cared that she had chosen to tell him the truth, and he swore that he would protect her and the life inside her, no matter what came from the skies above. Tears filled her eyes, because she had never known such acceptance and such strength. And in that moment, she felt something greater than duty, greater than fear, greater than survival. She felt hope, but deep within, she also felt the shadow of danger, because she knew her people would sense her betrayal, and they would not forgive it. And she was right, because far above, hidden in the dark of space, her commanders had already discovered what she was hiding. The signals of her body told them the truth. The child inside her was no longer a secret, and their whispers filled the halls of power as they declared her mission corrupted and her loyalty broken. And they sent out hunters with orders to capture her and erase both her and the human, so that no mark of this forbidden life would remain. The woman felt it before she even saw it, a sharp, cold weight pressing into her chest, a warning from instinct she had long buried, and she knew they were coming. She told the human that their time was almost over, and that they must be ready to run, and he did not question her. He did not doubt her. He only took her hand and told her that he would stand with her against whatever came, even if it was the end. The fear that lived inside her grew darker, but the bond she shared with him grew brighter and stronger. And as the night closed in around them, she felt the life within her stir, as if it too understood the danger, as if it too wanted to survive. And she whispered silently to the unborn child that no matter what happened, she would not let them take it. She would fight not as a soldier of her people, but as a mother and as a woman who had finally found something worth more than orders, worth more than her world, worth more than her own life. And as the first shadow of the hunters moved across the skies, the woman knew that the war for her soul was ending, but a new battle was only beginning, and this battle would decide not only her fate and the fate of the man she loved, but the fate of the life inside her, a life that carried the power to change two worlds forever. The night was heavy with silence, yet the woman felt a deep shiver through her body, because she knew the hunters of her people were coming. And once they arrived, there would be no place left to hide, and no chance left to beg for mercy. Because mercy was not in their hearts, they were raised to follow orders without thought, just as she had once been, and now their orders were simple: find her, capture her, and erase the human and the unborn child before the seed of betrayal could grow into something greater. She held the hand of the human as they moved through the shadows of the small town, and her heart pounded with fear, but also with determination, because this was no longer only about her survival, and no longer only about his life. It was about the life inside her that had not yet seen the light of day, and yet already carried the weight of two worlds upon it. And she whispered to herself again and again that she would not let them take it from her, no matter how strong they were. The human did not ask questions. He saw the terror in her eyes, and he understood more than words could explain. He knew danger was close. He knew their time was short, and still he chose to stay by her side, and she felt his strength in every step and every breath. And she wondered how a man who had nothing but simple dreams could face a storm that even she feared, and yet he did, and his courage lit a fire in her heart that her people had never been able to kill. They moved through dark streets and narrow paths, and behind them she could already sense the hunters closing in, their shadows drifting like ghosts, and their presence pressing down upon her like chains. Made of cold steel, she knew their tactics. She knew they would not strike openly. At first they would surround, they would weaken. They would force her to run until she was too tired to stand, and then they would strike with precision and end it all in silence, she told the human. They had to keep moving beyond the town into the hills where the air was clear and the ground gave cover, and he agreed without hesitation. He led her through fields and rivers, his hand steady even as the night grew colder, and the stars above seemed to burn like silent witnesses, and she felt both hunted and alive in ways she had never known before, because every step was a battle, and every heartbeat was a choice to keep going. At last they reached the edge of the forest, and there she stopped to catch her breath, and in that silence, she heard the sound of movement all around them. The hunters were near, too near, and her chest tightened with dread, because she knew they would not wait any longer. They would strike tonight, and either she would fall, or she would fight, and there was no other path left. Human turned to her and told her that no matter what came, he would not leave her. He would not run without her. He would stand, even if it cost him everything. And those words shook her, because she realized that he was not afraid, not in the way her people believed humans should be, weak and fragile instead. He stood with strength born not from power but from love and loyalty, and she thought to herself that maybe this was the secret her leaders feared. Maybe this was why they sent her to take what he carried, because they knew that the greatest weapon of humanity was not their bodies or their minds but their hearts. The shadows moved, and from the trees the hunters emerged, silent and deadly, their eyes glowing faintly with cold light, and their weapons shining with the promise of swift death. They spoke no words. They simply stepped forward in formation and surrounded the two of them, and the woman felt her breath catch, because she knew them. She knew how ruthless they could be, and she knew that even she, with all her training, could not defeat them all. But when she looked at the human, she saw no surrender in his gaze, only defiance. The leader of the hunters stepped closer, and his voice was sharp and cold as he told her that her mission was over, that she was no longer one of them, that her body and the child within it belonged to the leaders, and that the human beside her was nothing more than a mistake to be erased. She felt rage rise inside her, stronger than fear, and for the first time, she shouted back, defying the very people who had shaped her, telling them that the child was hers, that the human was hers, that her choices were hers, and that no order, no command, and no threat could take that away. Hunters did not pause. They raised their weapons and prepared to strike, but in that instant the human moved, standing in front of her, shielding her with his own body, and the sight of it broke something inside her, because never before had anyone stood between her and death with nothing but their own life as a shield, and she realized that if she let him fall, the life inside her would have no father, and she would have no reason left to fight. So she drew upon everything she had ever been taught, every lesson of combat, every instinct of survival, and she attacked not with cold precision, but with the fury of a heart that had something worth protecting. And the battle exploded in the dark forest, shadows and light clashing as hunters struck, and she struck back, and the human fought beside her, not with skill like hers, but with sheer will, refusing to fall even when blood marked his skin. The fight was brutal and endless, and with every moment she felt her strength fading, but she also felt the pulse of life within her pushing her forward, as if the unborn child itself was giving her the will to go on. And when at last the first hunter fell, and then the second, she felt a surge of hope, because perhaps they were not unstoppable, perhaps together she and the human could survive. But as the night stretched on, the hunters pressed harder, and the circle closed tighter, and she realized with dread that even if they defeated these ones, more would come, because her people would not stop until she was captured or destroyed, and the only path left was to run once more deeper into the world of humans, where her people could not easily follow. And so, with blood on her hands and fire in her heart, she took the hand of the man she loved, and together they fled again into the darkness, with the hunters' voices rising behind them, promising that this was not the end. And she knew they were right because the true test was still ahead, and soon she would have to make the final choice, one that could change not just her fate and his, but the fate of two entire worlds forever. The forest was still dark when they stopped running, their bodies tired and their breaths heavy, but the woman knew they could not rest for long, because the hunters would never give up. They were built for pursuit. They would follow until the end of the earth, if needed, and she knew that soon the final confrontation would come, and she feared it, but she also felt a strength deep inside her that she had never known before, and that strength was not only hers, it came from the man beside her who refused to abandon her, and from the child inside her who deserved a future. The human touched her shoulder and told her they had to stop running and face them, because running forever was not a life, and he said that sometimes a person has to stand and fight for what matters, and she listened to his words, and though fear lived in her chest, she understood that he was right, because if they kept running they would be hunted down like animals, and the child would be born into nothing but shadows and fear. But if they stood now, if they fought now, they could claim a future even if it cost them everything. She closed her eyes and called upon every lesson, every memory, every part of her that had once belonged to her people, and she thought of how she had been made into a weapon to serve without question, and how she had been sent here to steal and betray. But now she was no longer only a weapon, she was more. She was a mother, she was a woman, she was something new, and when she opened her eyes she told the human that she was ready, that together they would face what was coming. The hunters arrived with the dawn, their figures cutting through the mist like shadows, made of steel, their weapons gleaming with deadly light, their voices cold as they declared that her time was over, that the leaders demanded her return, that the child must be destroyed before it could be born, because a child of two worlds was a danger to both, and the human must be erased because he was a witness and nothing more. The woman felt her heart pound, but she stood firm, and for the first time she did not beg for mercy, and she did not hide her fear. She stepped forward and told them that she would not return, that the child would live, and that no order, no command, and no fear would change her choice. She told them that she had seen the truth of humanity, that weakness was not weakness, that kindness was not weakness, that love was not weakness, but power greater than anything her people had ever known, and that if her leaders could not see this, then they were blind. The human stood beside her, his hand in hers, and his voice strong as he declared that humanity was not fragile as her people believed, that they could fight when threatened, and they could forgive when betrayed, and that he would not step aside even if it meant his death. And the hunters faltered for a moment, because they had never faced such defiance from both human and alien. Together, the leader of the hunters stepped forward and raised his weapon, and the air trembled with the promise of death. But before he could strike, the woman unleashed all the power she had carried within her, not just the training of her people, but the strength of her heart, and the fire of her choice, and the love that bound her to the human, and the life within her. And with a cry she struck, not with despair, but with hope, and the hunters fell back in shock, because they had never seen such force born from emotion. Battle was fierce and endless, the hunters pressing forward with ruthless strength, and the woman and the human fighting back with every ounce of will they had, and though their bodies were marked with pain, their spirits refused to break, and at last, when the final strike was made, the hunters stepped back broken and beaten, their leader falling to one knee, his eyes filled not with victory, but with doubt. In that silence the woman spoke again, telling them that they could kill her if they wished, but the child would live, the child would be remembered, the child would be the bridge between two worlds, and no force could stop it now. And her words carried such fire and such truth that even the hunters could not deny it, and they lowered their weapons, not in surrender, but in uncertainty, because they had no order for what to do. When faced with a heart stronger than fear, the hunters withdrew into the mist, their voices silent and their mission undone, and the woman stood shaking with exhaustion but alive, and the human held her close and told her that they had won not only for themselves, but for the life that was coming, and tears filled her eyes because she knew it was true, and she knew that everything had changed far above her. People would hear of her defiance, they would learn of the child, and of the human who stood against them, and some would burn with anger and demand war, but others would whisper questions they had never dared to ask before. What if humanity was not weak? What if there was something to be learned from them? What if the child was not a danger, but a key to survival? And slowly those whispers would grow into voices, and those voices would grow into change. The woman and the human returned to the quiet world of the town, their bodies scarred but their hearts stronger than ever. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the life within her grew, and she felt it move, and she knew that soon the child would be born into a world uncertain and dangerous, but also full of hope and possibility. And she promised herself that she would protect it, always, no matter the cost. And when the child was finally born, with eyes that held both the light of her people and the warmth of humanity, the woman understood that this was the beginning of something far greater than her mission had ever been, because this child was not only hers and not only his. This child was the bridge that could unite two worlds that had always been divided, and the proof that love could create what fear could never destroy. So the story ended not with the fall of a world or the victory of one people over another, but with the birth of hope and the promise that even in the darkest places a single choice could change everything. And the woman who had once been nothing but a weapon now stood as a mother and as a symbol, and beside her the human who had once been nothing but ordinary now stood as the father of a new future. And together they faced the unknown, not with fear, but with courage and with love. The end.